So when you think of inference, it is interesting, there are really several steps that are important to keep in mind. There are two types of inference in the survey setting. One is the inference from a respondent to the characteristic of a respondent. And one is the inference from the characteristic of the sample to the characteristic of the population. What do we mean with that? Let's focus on the first part, the respondent to the characteristic of the respondent. Let's say you have an answer, very simple one, for example, the answer to the question, how old are you? You measure age and you're interested in a larger concept, which is aging process of the cells, of the mind, experience, life experience in some form or whatnot. So you get the respondent's answer, but the characteristic, aging characteristic that you're interested in, is already an inference leap from that particular item that you're interested in and the answer to that item to the general concept that you're interested in. So that's one piece of inference that we're doing here, right? You infer from my answer to the question age something about my experience, my living conditions, my health, and the like. Now, with all the answers to the individual responses and the inferred characteristic with it, we do some statistical computing, right? So we form an average of all the respondents' answers and the implicit characteristic. If you come from psychology, you might be used to having multiple measures that form together a dimension, a psychology trait, a characteristic on a measurement scale. That, of course, would also be in this first part. But then again, averaging that characteristic over all of the respondents would be one form of statistical computing that gets you at the characteristic of your sample. So you have values for everybody. An average age of a classroom, an average age of a population. Careful, of the population only if you ask everybody. If it is a sample, then at first you have the average age of the particular sample. So I take from all students at a university a sample of students, let's say it's random, 1,000 students from a university that has 35,000, and I compute the age. That would be the step until here. Then there is an inference piece from that characteristic of the sample to the characteristic of the population. So if my sample average for the university students were, let's say, 21, then I can do an inference to the entire population. Depending on how I drew my sample, I might directly infer that that same value is the characteristic of the population. But in order to do that, you have to design your survey in a certain way that these two inferential pieces do make sense. And that's what we're going to talk about when we look at the different design decisions for a survey. But keep in mind the two parts where inference happens. We will introduce one as sort of an aspect of measurement, a characteristic of measurement and inference about measurement. That's the first part. And the other one as a characteristic of representation. Do the people that you gather information from represent and allow inference to the entire population?